This was the moment that a 32,000-ton container ship slammed into a steel bridge in Baltimore, toppling the structure in a matter of seconds.
Be advised, the entire bridge, the entire Key Bridge has fallen into the harbor.
As the sun rose, the scale of the destruction of the Francis Scott Key Bridge came into full view. The 300-metre-long ship with its nose rammed into the steelwork of the bridge. A bridge that stood for nearly 50 years, but in the early hours of Tuesday morning came crashing down in an instant after the Singapore-registered vessel struck one of its main support columns at approximately 1:30 a.m.
To hear the words that the Key Bridge has collapsed, it's shocking and heartbreaking.
A state of emergency has been declared in Baltimore on America's east coast as divers, helicopters and support ships search for survivors. Authorities said at least 8 construction workers were on the bridge mending potholes at the time. One is in hospital in a serious condition. One is uninjured, but 6 others are still unaccounted for. The governor said the container ship was travelling at a very rapid speed of about 8 knots, as captured by this web camera, and that it lost power, causing its lights to go out moments before it hit the bridge. The crew on board issued a mayday call that officials said allowed them to quickly halt additional traffic coming onto the bridge, though it's not clear whether there were any vehicles actually on the bridge at the moment of collapse.
Did you just say that it issued a mayday in enough time that you were able to stop all traffic from entering both sides?
We're thankful that between the mayday and the collapse that we had officials who were able to begin to stop the flow of traffic.
But there were some on the bridge. There have been reports that have been sonar that have detected vehicles at the bottom of the water. There could still be people trapped inside or potentially have died in vehicles, is that correct?
Well, the investigation is still going on to find out exactly how many people in what situation. But the thing that we do know, many of the vehicles were stopped before they got onto the bridge, which saved lives in a very, very heroic way.
In the nearby town of Dundalk, locals were still in shock, having been woken up by crashing sounds in the middle of the night.
It made my house shake. My friend, she thought that maybe a plane crashed into the water or something like that.
So it was that loud?
Yeah. The only thing we can do is just hope for the 2 survivors and pray for the rest.
I don't understand how this bridge came down in a matter of just 2 seconds. And you think to yourself, well, you know, how many times have I been on the bridge? How many times have my family members, friends traveled on this bridge? There's really no words. Very, very, very scary stuff.
When my husband got up, he said, "Chris, the Key Bridge is gone." Yeah, we're both iron workers. You know, our union hall built that bridge, and so of such historic significance. It's devastating. It's very sad. And so much tonnage of steel on infrastructure, a magnificent infrastructure, to go down like a toothpicks. And not to mention the lives, you know. Everybody's praying for those poor people.
It's not clear when or how they will begin to untangle the wreckage of this morning's devastating accident. In the meantime, the active search and rescue mission continues, but the hope for survivors in these chilly waters dims with every passing hour.
Well, what's really struck me is just how emotional people are here, particularly down on the water's edge. One man told me that the bridge was like an old friend, he said, someone that he looked forward to seeing every morning as he drank his cup of coffee. Nobody here can believe how the bridge crumpled as it did in just a matter of seconds. Of course, beyond the emotion, there is the trade angle. Baltimore is one of America's biggest ports, ferrying billions of dollars worth of goods every day. But as long as that container ship there, you can see behind me, remains stuck in the river, nothing can get in or out. In the last hour or so, Joe Biden has described this as a terrible accident. He said that all federal dollars will be made available to replace the bridge, but nobody, I can tell you, wants to say, hazard a guess how long that will take. One thing, though, is for sure, had this incident happened during rush hour rather than the early hours of this morning, we would be looking at an altogether different story.
Siobhan Kennedy, thank you very much. Well, in a moment, we'll look at the impact on international trade. Now, one of America's major ports is blocked. But how could such a bridge collapse in the first place and so quickly? Well, we can speak now to structural engineer Dr. Mark Richards. Was there something about the design of the bridge that made the impact so catastrophic?
I think in these sort of situations, it's very easy to search for answers for these sort of catastrophes, which is based on design. And I think it is right, in fact, that we now, as we respond to this kind of event, is to scrutinise all things which could have been at fault. But I think that if we look at the engineering here, if I may, and of course I'm removing myself here from the catastrophe itself, which is very distressing. But if we look at the engineering, then there's many safeguards in place for the design of these sorts of structures to consider possible events. I think the key here is whether this particular event would have been within those cases which are considered to be possible or not.
What was striking, wasn't it, Mark, was the way that the whole of the bridge, that central structure, seemed to come down and so quickly. And is that because it was all effectively one piece?
Yeah, this sort of bridge is designed as a lattice truss structure. It also relies on the fact that it's a continuous structure which spans over a number of supports, and in fact in this case there's 4 supports. One of those supports was catastrophically removed, and the ability of the bridge then to continue to perform is very much compromised. I think we have to look at the event which caused it, and I think that maybe the lessons is to understand what we can do with these sorts of navigation channels to make sure that these sort of events don't take place, rather than to try and design buildings or bridges to withstand any event.
That's right, because it was in this major shipping lane, right? And I understand that a lot of bridges in shipping lanes are given extra protections to stop ships coming into contact with them at all in the first place. Are you surprised that there was an impact?
Well, as you say, these sorts of structures with this level of contribution to the overall infrastructure are usually protected in the watercourse as well. I've only seen video, just as the rest of us have, but it's normal that obstacles are put in the way of bridges, such that they act as a first hit, so to speak, so that they don't actually reach the bridges themselves. So, and of course, it's easy to speculate that maybe those things weren't in place. I don't know, but I think it's also the management of the navigation channel as well, which I'm sure will be under scrutiny as well here.
Mark Richards, thank you so much for that from an engineering perspective. So what impact will this have on trade? Marco Forgione is Director General of the Institute of Export and International Trade. It's a busy port, isn't it, Baltimore, Marco? What impact will it have?
Well, it's the 9th busiest port in the US. It is the #1 port for automotive and vehicles. You know, over 750,000 cars and vehicles are handled through the port each year. And at a time when we've got constraints in the Panama Canal and the ongoing crisis in the Red Sea, this is going to have a significant and dramatic impact on trade in the US, but also on US exports. And particularly relevant for the UK and the EU is the fact that over 500,000 tons of LNG, liquefied natural gas, is exported from Baltimore each month. And, you know, the US is the UK's largest supplier of LNG.
So there will be ripple effects then that we will feel here in the UK potentially because of this one port in the US being shut down temporarily.
Yes, and the implications of this will ripple out. You know, there are ships that were due to be berthing in Baltimore, which now won't be able to. We've got ships that are still stuck in Baltimore. And then you've got the onshore infrastructure and supply chain that will now have to shift to try and cope with that disruption. So the impact of this is going to go for many weeks or months, depending on how quickly we can get Baltimore back and operational. But it has to be borne in mind that this is